Welcome to the Black Catholic Messenger Show, where we keep it Black and we keep it Catholic. Today we have a very special guest with us, Cory, and I didn't ask how to say your last name, so I'm just going to say it's Frontin.
Yeah, that's it.
Wait, really? It's Frontin?
Yeah.
Wow, that's great for Black culture. We're so happy. I'm even more happy to have you now today. Tell us about yourself, Cory.
Thanks, Nate. I am, I guess, a Black Catholic person. I'm originally from the D.C. area.
Shout out to D.C.
Yes, I'm a proud graduate of DeMatha Catholic High School. Which is really a fun place to have gone to high school. I would say, except for gym class, which was rough.
Wait, which did you have celebrities that you were in gym class with? Future celebs?
Yeah. My class had, I think, 3 NBA players.
Lord.
And an NFL player. So, yeah. I don't know if Victor Oladipo is listening. I know he's a Black Catholic. So,
Yo, shout out to Victor. I'm in Indianapolis right now, so super shout out to Victor.
That's great. But yeah, so anyway, I went to Maryland. I did study engineering, and then I did a year of volunteer work, building houses at Habitat for Humanity. And I'm currently a PhD student in aerospace engineering up in Boston. Yeah, that's me. I don't know why I'm here. I think Nate's trying to convince me to be a guest columnist at some point.
We need writers at BCM. And especially smart people that are getting their PhDs. I mean, I don't have a PhD. Well, most Black people don't.
That's fair. I don't know that I can promise being a smart person writing at BCM. But, I got the credential at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Credentials are everything. I mean, haven't we learned that by now?
But anyway, thanks for having me, Nate. I'm really excited.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. So I know for this episode, I was, it came out of a moment of me being a little perturbed about this new book that has come out on the 6 African Americans on the path to sainthood from Our Sunday Visitor. And I had written a piece about it last year. I think it was in mid-December, well before the book came out, just because I saw who was contributing. And I didn't have beef with everybody who was contributing to the book, but apparently I had beef with some of them, and I didn't even know about it until I did a little bit of research. And so I wrote this piece saying that I thought the book could possibly fall flat. Those are the words I use, fall flat, because I felt like the perspective could be a little skewed based on the people I saw that were contributing. And, that piece was when we were first starting out. And I don't think a lot of people read it, but apparently some people involved with the Julia Greeley Guild read it. And so they kind of went ham on me in their latest guild newsletter, which was, interesting. I don't want to be on the wrong side of any of these guilds, but yeah, that happened. And so then I wrote a review after it came out this month, and or part of a review. I started going chapter by chapter, and I did the first chapter on Pierre Toussaint, and then the second chapter on who was the second chapter on? Father Josh contributed reflection, Venerable Mother Henriette DeLille. And I won't be finishing the rest of the review, but we'll get to that maybe a little bit later in the show. But yeah, I definitely want to discuss, the phenomenon of Black Catholic stories being told not always by Black Catholics. It's very interesting phenomenon. And the fact that, in most cases, I think the stories are being told by quote unquote conservative, often white Catholics. And I've been told not to keep using this word conservative. So maybe we start there. Like, what am I even talking about when I'm talking about conservative Catholics? Like, I feel like I'm answering that question more than I thought I would have to, because apparently conservative means a lot of things to a lot of different people.
Yeah,
thoughts?
That's a great question. I guess the question in my mind is, what do you think you mean when you say conservative Catholics?
I think I'm talking about the kinds of people that love EWTN and, are super pro-life. And by that, they mean they're really opposed to abortion. And, they might, that's not restricted to conservative Catholics, but combine together these elements. So, you voted for Donald Trump You love EWTN. You're really opposed to abortion. You're fairly critical of people that dissent from one or more Catholic teachings to the point that you kind of dismiss them entirely. And you probably have an interesting relationship with Black Catholics and the Black Catholic movement. That would be my combined rough definition of a conservative Catholic.
I feel like this is a lot of different angles. I feel like I don't know. There's a lot to say here because the way I kind of think of when you say that, what I think of is people that subordinate their Catholicism to their political worldview, which happens to be conservative. And
I mean, that's not too far off. That's not too far off from what I'm saying. Although I don't necessarily have that specifically in mind, but that may be the explanation for the things that I'm saying. Whereas I'm just kind of describing it.
Yeah. Well, I think it insofar as that you have a criticism, like I think that it's important to like get to the meat of like the essence of what that criticism is. And I do think that like the idea of people who dissent from one or more teachings of the Catholic Church, like I feel like this is something that I've seen a lot, and maybe it's like hard to exactly put a finger on, but like the teachings that you dissent to seem to be like very often dictated by your, I guess, like political ideology, in the sense that like sure, you might dissent from kind of like the hot button go-to issues in the mainstream like political discourse, but then like there are also a lot of teachings of the church that are held with, you know, doctrinal superiority, and like you don't really, there's no question about it in the record of the church, but people seem to have no interest in like actually like staying with them, like the person I imagine when you say conservative Catholics. And like I find it interesting because I've been kind of on this like multi-year project to understand like politics or have a political worldview that's defined first and foremost by like being anchored in Catholic tradition, and in a way that like actually makes sense. And it's really hard to do, like really hard to do.
That's putting it lightly.
Yeah, but I think it's really interesting because there's so many things, right? So like obviously on the Black Catholic Messenger show, I think the like key one that comes to mind is like the racism that kind of runs rampant amongst our, you know, white church brethren. Like I've experienced probably the most explicitly racist things that I've ever seen in my life in the context of the church, in the name of the church.
Wow.
And in my mind, that's a pretty massive dissent from the teaching of the church, right?
Yeah, that's fair. And you know, maybe that is another element that I could have been, that I had in mind, but I didn't say it because I don't know that I characterize, like the people that contributed to this book, to this book on the Black Saints. I don't imagine that any of them dissent from any church teachings, especially not on racism.
Yeah.
But, you know, on issues like the death penalty, a lot of conservative Catholics probably do say, you know, forget what Pope Francis said. And generally, they might say things like that about Pope Francis. Yeah.
So I'm curious. So when you say that the Julia Greeley Guild went ham on you, how did they go ham on you? What exactly?
So I think somebody in the guild is connected to Our Sunday Visitor. I don't know if it's Michael Heinlein, the editor of the book himself, but it was worded in such a way that I would have thought it was him, because he definitely did not like my pre-review or my review. Mm-hmm. And so they basically said, Nate Tenor Williams wrote in the Black Catholic Messenger that the new book might fall flat before he even read it, and because some of the contributors might not agree with his understanding of Black thought or something like that. And they used that quote, Black thought, which is the most interesting part of all. So I mean, I knew it was written by a white person, and I knew.
So he said that Black thought is contradictory to what you were saying about it.
He's saying that he thinks I disagree with the Black contributors in the book because they don't think about Black whatever the same way that I do, which is sort of true. sort of not true, which is why it's interesting that you brought up racism in relation to conservative Catholics, because that specifically wasn't my criticism of this book in general, because there's multiple Black contributors and they're all opposed to racism, but their proximity to Catholics and Catholic institutions that struggle mightily with the issue of racism certainly played into my criticism.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I think it's really interesting that you end up in a situation where, like, by and large, the people who are supporting the guild, the Julia Greeley Guild in particular, but I think this also goes across the board, nominally Black Catholic institutions or historical societies, and this isn't limited to Catholicism, but you end up having these white people who end up caretakers in some way of Black history and Black legacy in a way that is both and sometimes simultaneously an act of charity and also an act of historical incompleteness or historical inaccuracy. Mm-hmm. It's a really tough balance. Like I was wondering, what do you think about that balance?
Well, I mean, I don't think there is a balance right now. It's kind of just, we got to deal with it. And the Julia Greeley Guild thing kind of opened my eyes to that whole situation. And I had gotten into, or I had some contact with the guild associated with Mother Mary Lang as well in Baltimore. And they also did not like a piece that I had written, not about her or about this book, but about St. Francis Academy and their football program and their football coach. And so that was kind of my first clue, but I didn't put it together at the time. But I had contacted someone and I didn't realize that they were a white person. But once I did realize, I was like, interesting. And then when Julia Greeley Guild came out with this note about me and my piece, I was like, how many of these guilds are run more or less by white Catholics and a certain kind of white Catholic, conservative white Catholics? And how integral is that to the process of a successful sainthood cause? Like, you can't exactly have, so like National Catholic Reporter is probably not going to successfully get a sainthood cause through the Vatican for various reasons. And it's like, maybe this is the only way that these people are ever going to get canonized, is if, white people tell these stories, or, just generally non-controversial people that go with the flow of American Catholicism. And to me, that's troublesome, but it is what it is. And I guess at the end of the day, the ends justify the means. I don't know. It's like I said, I don't think there's a balance, and it's kind of just a reality that has to be dealt with, because we're only 3% of the U.S. church. So I guess we can't expect to dominate any sainthood causes. Or like any leadership things in the church.
It's interesting. I feel like, it again ties back to so many questions of modern American life. But even within the church, there's this question of like fundraising. Like, can you raise the funds to get this person canonized? Which is like a really kind of horrifying thing in the grand scale of things, where like that's should have nothing to do with it. And yet
it's like, it's everything. If you don't do it, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's crazy to think that, like, do you think St. Francis would ever have gotten canonized if like a couple millionaires had to get behind his cause for canonization? Like, that's a little horrifying.
Yeah, we should be grateful that it hasn't always costed $500,000 to get somebody to sainthood.
But it also makes me wonder how much it's like the American context versus, other ones, right? Because, I don't know. It's an interesting question.
I mean, like in Africa, if they got a saint that their cause is moving towards the goal, it's probably run by a bunch of people from that person's community. Yeah. And that's just the way the rest of the world is, because, not every country's a melting pot run by, a dominant white group. So lucky them. But I guess here in America, That's all we get. If we're gonna get an African American saint, it's gonna be.
That's really wild to think about. I never thought about that before. Like the unique nature of, I guess, inequality makes it really hard. Because I even think of like Pier Giorgio Frassati from Italy, right? Who a pretty radically redistributionist in both his politics and his like daily life. And yeah, he managed to get canonized. So it's not like he just like straight up. I mean, he was from a very wealthy family.
Are they the ones that funded his cause?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
Also, what did you call him? Did you call him a distributist?
I mean, he was redistributive in his.
We can't just call him socialist because I know people do that.
Yeah, so I don't know if there's a strict answer to whether or not he was, but he certainly, like, if anything, his politics were described by, democratic socialism as it's interpreted today. But I don't know that he necessarily used those words at the time, nor did they carry the baggage that they do nowadays. So I would love to call him that personally, but I think that is infusing my own political dispositions into the conversation that I don't necessarily want to do either way.
Well, I love to do that personally, so that's why I frequently refer to him and others as socialists. But we don't have to get into all that, and we can be grateful that the 6 African Americans, none of them were known to be socialists or anything like socialists.
I think that would probably put a pretty strong no on any of their candidates.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, like, I do think it's important to be grateful to folks that do want to put work in. Like, I think it is important to say, hey, listen, we appreciate you, but when we have mild criticism of the work that you're doing, perhaps listening may actually be the way to go about this, because there's aspects of these people's sainthood, right, that like fundamentally cannot be appreciated by people who are in these, I guess, like guilds of canonization. And I mean, that's heavy. That's important.
Yeah, I'm definitely grateful. I'm not out here saying, stop the cause.
Yeah.
Restart it. Let's start from the ground up. No, not at all. Like it will be what it will be. And I probably, maybe I went too far in my words, what I said, but at least I can say it came from the heart. That means something, right?
For what it's worth, I tend to think that you were pretty spot on in your criticisms, but I also have not read the entire excerpt at this point, so I should.
That's what everybody keeps telling me, which like terrifies me. It makes me think that I said something that just wasn't true. And people have said, what you wrote was wrong. And actually, that's why I'm not finishing the review, is because I was instructed by higher ups in the community that I'm trying to join, the Society of Priests, that I shouldn't finish the review, that I was, quote, I'm pretty sure this is a quote, clearly wrong in what I wrote. So yeah, I think every couple of days I scroll back through what I wrote. Like, did I say something wrong? Was I wrong in the historical facts that I attempted to correct? And I don't think that I am. And I also heard that Father Josh Johnson, who wrote the reflection on Venerable Mother Henriette, that he had consulted the Sisters of the Holy Family before he this book was published. And so I'm thinking to myself, like, did the Sisters of the Holy Family not know that, Bishop Antoine Blanc is the reason that Henriette couldn't wear a habit, and at first the reason she couldn't take vows? Like, that's fascinating to me. Maybe there's just some historical lapse there. Or maybe I don't know. It's hard to explain, but me hoping constantly that I really didn't write anything slanderous.
Yeah. Well, I find that interesting. Do you have, I mean, insofar as you're free to say and comfortable saying, like, I imagine that kind of comes, I guess the I don't think fraternal is the right word. I guess the obedience that you are on the path, or at least discerning, professing, is kind of imposing this particular, I guess, like, it's a completely loaded term in the conversation at this point, but conservative in the sense of, don't step out into this land of criticism kind of mentality on you. Is that tough to square? Like, especially given the history of the Josephites that you have written about multiple times before.
Yeah. Yeah. How much can I say about that? There's definitely a conservative slant to, I think, a lot of religious orders and societies, especially here in the United States. And that's just a reality, I guess. Sometimes it just depends on who's in leadership at the time, because the instructions, in my case, didn't come from, I don't think, like a council. It was from one person. So that person's personal feelings or understandings is really where I think it's coming from. And is there a line of connection historically? I hope not. I don't think there is. And but it is interesting to think about, if it was the Jesuits or, the Maryknoll Society, like, I don't think anybody would have said a word.
Yeah.
But the guy who told me to stop writing the review also endorsed the book, so can't have me out here just saying whatever.
That's, I guess, fair. I don't know if that's fair or not. Actually, now that I say that's fair, I don't know if I literally mean that, but at least figuratively, that's fair.
Somewhat fair.
I find that really interesting to think about, but within the context of like kind of thinking about the greater church and what the Black Catholic message in particular offers it. I think this is like such an interesting question because I can think of like my own experience, and I'm from the Archdiocese of Washington, at least growing up. Looking at the seminarians there, and they had a like particularly strict, I forget the right word, but I guess like the master of seminarians or the guy who's in charge of the seminary, pretty strict. Like you could say like quasi-traditionalist. I don't think that he was like necessarily fully culturally trad as it's like kind of modernly said, but he definitely had, I guess, like strong liturgical leanings. I guess traditionalism, and I like one thought that I remember having when it was like, I'm a Catholic kid thinking about what's my vocation, looking at the seminarians. One thing that I very distinctly remember thinking is like, man, I could never fit in, and it was like a very specifically kind of like racialized thought, like the whiteness and like the square like 50s era feeling whiteness of all the seminarians that I saw made me feel in a particular way as if I wasn't like welcome, and like evidently it wasn't my vocation at the end of the day. But to think that there are folks for whom it might have been, who basically had that exact same thought and chose not to, that's a really scary thought to me. And it kind of
there has to be thousands of people like that.
And yeah, I don't know. It just makes me really sad to think that even a pretty mild criticism like yours is not necessarily being taken seriously well by a lot of people. And yeah, I'm curious. Yeah.
I mean, so the things I've written about the Josephites' history was partially born out of the fact that it was a predominantly white order for most of its history. And only recently, I think, has it become a predominantly Black order. And they just had their first Black superior general in 2011 or 14, I think. So, I mean, it's not that anymore. But I mean, yeah, for most religious orders in the United States, that was exactly the experience, I think, of Black people who wanted to join.
Yeah.
And this is for sisterhoods and also for the priesthood. It's just like Black people, their culture was not accepted. And if your culture is not accepted, you're not accepted. And so the only ones that enter in, and I think this is still a factor today, is the ones that enter in are the Black people who have more assimilated into white culture, who don't have a particular attachment to Black culture. It's easier for them to survive in that environment. And those are generally the ones who I think are interested in the first place. Like you said, it often veers into the traditionalist category. And I think that makes up the majority. This is a ballpark guess. That makes up the majority of people pursuing the priesthood and the sisterhood religious life among Americans is the people who are already, on that conservative end.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I also think it's interesting to think that, I mean, there's like this kind of aspect of the like traditionalist, I guess, tendency that we see in a lot of people that is like absolutely not bad, right? Like it's, there's an underlying part of it, like, and a part of it to which, like, as a Catholic person, I'm kind of attracted to, where it's like, oh, it's, yeah, the Eucharist is the source and summit of Christian life, right? That's like a theological statement.
Preach.
For many traditionalist people, like, that is one of the core aspects of their Catholicism, which I think is actually like a wonderful, like, great thing.
Absolutely.
But then you get these kind of aesthetic styles that flow forth from that, as if, the aesthetic styles are actually the important thing. And then moreover, like if you're, trying to be a traditionalist who is, venerating the Eucharist as the source and summit of Christian life in this particular aesthetic way, but then you turn around and you have like explicitly white supremacist ideas and harbor, communities in which that's allowed or even promoted. It's like with one arm, you're venerating like Christ, and with the other arm, you're like holding the spear with like a vinegar-soaked sponge in his mouth in the other hand. And it's like the thing that it always like kills me about that is just that, like, I don't understand how so viscerally you could contrast those two things in these scenes, and like why you don't end up seeing a better, I guess, marriage of these two I don't know, emergent ways of venerating Christ, right? The sacrifice of the cross. Like, Christ is present both in the Eucharist and your fellow man if you're a Catholic. And how do you only do one of those? Like, I would not be able to take one of them seriously but not the other. And I don't understand how that's possible for some folks.
I mean, I think we're all a product of our environments in one way or another. As a matter of fact, man, I can't remember where it's from now. I may be from the 1968 statement from the National Black Catholic Clergy Caucus, where someone said, your prejudices are brought with you into specifically the priesthood, into sisterhoods. And they were saying that is clearly what has happened in America, at least, is that the racism endemic to white American culture there's very few barriers to that in the hierarchy of the church, or in religious life in the priesthood, to be specific. And it's sad. It's just the way America is, unfortunately. And how do you stop it? How do you reverse it? Who knows? But I mean, the point of the Clergy Caucus statement was like, I mean, they gave bullet points of like what needs to happen.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know if they're the ones that said this about the priesthood and the sisterhoods, but I know they believed it. And they were basically saying, here's the things you have to do in order to relate properly with the Black community now and in the future. And A, those things didn't happen. And B, the tragedies they predicted, if those bullet points were not addressed, have happened. And so,
yeah,
here we are in 2021, still seeing some of the same crap. I mean, it's been a long time since 1968.
Yeah, it has. Well, so that brings me to another curiosity, and I think like a point that we can take in this conversation is, I think this idea of fraternal correction is really interesting, as it's like very frequently talked about in Catholicism in general, but in particular in kind of like trad circles. And I think one thing that I find very interesting to think about is how do we like have a Black Catholic, how do we perfect a Black Catholic fraternal correction, both amongst ourselves and with our like the greater church? Like, is it necessary that we be the person to do that? And two, is there anything that like being, I think particularly Black Catholics or Black American Catholics, that makes fraternal correction a challenge, or gives us an approach or a guide to doing it? And I think obviously your discourse, I don't know if discourse is the right word, with Father Johnson, I think brings up that question in a very interesting light. So I guess, do you want to kind of summarize like your specific critique of him as simply as you can, and like kind of where the conversation went after that?
Well, I should clarify first that the critique, or the part 2 of my review, was not specifically about Father Josh Johnson. There was, half of the chapter is written by Michael Heinlein, half is written by Father Josh. He just so happened to have, in some ways, echoed what I perceive to be erasures that were present in the biography written by Heinlein. And so that was why he got, some of the brunt of my criticism. And it's interesting that people, criticized the way that I spoke about him thereafter. And I don't think anybody criticized the way that I spoke. I mean, I was directing the same criticism at him and Heinlein, but the only people who said that I should have moved a little differently were the ones talking about the way I spoke of Father Josh, which is interesting because it was mostly like saying, within the Black community, we got to move a little differently, which, it wasn't something I considered at the time. I was just like, the book says this is the reality. I'm writing about it. But, there are probably other layers to consider. Fraternal correction within the Black Catholic community, because of our, we're kind of an endangered species in a lot of different ways. Maybe it does have to be, maybe I should have moved a little more carefully. Maybe I should have, I don't know that it would have changed what I wrote in my review, because again, this is a book that was published by that point. It's not like we're going to go back and change anything. But yeah, I don't know. There's definitely the concept of a Black code within the Black community, and there's a reason for that. And I certainly didn't follow it in this case, just because I felt, that would have been something to address before the book is written, in my opinion. Yeah. But yeah, I think there is a necessity for special considerations, perhaps, because, you don't want to have no Black Catholic voices, but at the same time, you don't want your Black Catholic voices to be untouchable, especially in a journalistic context. I mean, that should be the place where you can criticize and have dialogue. But I think in the cases of things that I've written, it's kind of more like, not even worthy of a response. Like, I write what I write. Very little feedback has been, I would like to say something about that. It's been more so like, you should have never did that. Therefore, crossing you out.
That was one of the things that I found interesting in kind of the discourse that followed your post, at least amongst our, I guess, like mutuals on Twitter, is that I found that your critique was very like material. It was centered on the content of the work and not on the people themselves. And the response is as if it had been about the people in a particular way. And I find that very interesting, just because it feels like that kind of response is like very much something that we deal with a lot, at least that I feel that I deal with a lot in critiquing any type of like racial issue in a white space. Where it basically like I can make a material critique and it's like, boom, immediately registers as like, are you calling me racist? It's like,
are you racist?
Yeah. And it's interesting because like I can even think of like a church situation where it was like doing like chaplaincy outreach. I noticed that the outreach that we did, and it was at my university, and what we hand out cups with mass times to literally anybody that would take one, we would hand it to on moving day. Okay. And I noticed in my first 2 years, maybe first and second year. Yeah. So I noticed that I just like sat back and I started watching and noticed that the majority white university chaplaincy was handing cups almost exclusively to white people. And I like started just like tallying, in my head or in my phone or something, how many Black people on campus got a cup. And it was a very pathetically small number from my sample and like of watching my peers. And so I brought it up with the chaplain, and he was pissed
At you.
at me. Yeah, and like this is one of my closest closest friends in life, like huge mentor figure in my life. But he was not happy that I was just like, maybe we want to just think about saying something to folks, and he was not happy about it. But we like basically talked about it later on, and it like had cooled off. He didn't ever, I think, explicitly agree with me. And this isn't to say that like that action created a change. Like I don't think I had particularly much to do with it, if it did change at all, right? Not describing to me. But over the course of the next couple of years, the chaplaincy became much more diverse and significantly black. And I have no idea ultimately what was the cause of that.
No. Shout out to you. Let's give it up for Cory.
I really don't know that like I had anything to do with it, to be honest. Like I think that was just one fleeting moment in the course of things, right? But the question comes back to like how do we actually make these critiques of the church when there's this like vertical power dynamic, and also like that realization was not a comfortable or fun one for me. Like I was having fun calling someone out, and I'm sure you understand that feeling as well. Like I don't think you get any joy out of reading a book about black saints and having it never mention their blackness or their exclusion on the part, like by bishops, literal bishops.
Not just bishops, but the one you literally praised in the same chapter. Like it was like that. You are correct to say that it was not fun. Like reading that was hurtful to me, and that's why I wrote critically. And folks were not happy. But I think you bring up an interesting point that there's this phenomenon of people not, like it wouldn't have mattered. Like they were not going to accept that kind of criticism, period. Yeah. And it has to do with, the volatility of these issues, the history of Catholic media, I'm sure, but also just Catholic history in this space where, nobody wants to be seen as a racist. And it's sometimes more important to not be seen as a racist than to actually, be an anti-racist and not do racist stuff. Yeah. Intentionally or unintentionally. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I always have thought about it as being very interesting, just like in the sense that, if you're you're discerning to be a priest, and you'll likely at some point work in a parish if you find that that's your vocation. And in that assignment, there will be souls that are assigned to you that your job is to cultivate to heaven, right? And that's the case for a chaplain or for a parish priest, a white one especially. And if there are black souls in your parish that you are not cultivating and evangelizing and trying, to get across the line on Judgment Day, that's your account, man. Like that's on you. And it's a tragedy, a travesty that this, American sin is so deeply ingrained to the point that we can't really even make a slight fraternal correction to try to correct the tide.
Yeah, we can't even talk about it. And it's just under the radar enough that, that's what makes it so unspeakable. If it's not super explicit, if they're not carrying picket signs saying God doesn't like black people, then, it's not racist and you can't insinuate that it's wrong or that there's no space for critique because it's not, explicitly KKK.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like the Catholic tradition has so much to say about it too, if it were only to pause for a minute, right? Even I'm sure you can think of situations in your own life, whether it's with people of different races or with colorism within the black community. I've certainly caught myself in moments of contemplation and been oh no, you know what? I've done not the right thing in situations, right? I have had classist dispositions. I have had all these kinds of incomplete. I've thought of myself having an education as being better than people who don't have an education for no particular reason. And catching yourself in those moments is a good thing. Like you want to stop and think and be like, hey, oh no, that's not right. Like I need to work on myself. I need to like be more Christ-like. And racism is no different, but it seems so hard for so many people to even just slightly breach it.
It's a volatile topic.
It is, but I guess we were lucky enough to be born on the side of very low proclivity for that sort of sin. So I guess
lucky indeed, I guess.
Silver lining,
Yeah, it's interesting to think of just being born black in this society, like. And I started to read the next chapter of the book, which I will not be reviewing, and Bishop Joseph Perry, who I've been quite critical of in the past, actually speaks to that to some extent, of just like meditating on, the purpose of Black suffering in the United States. Like, why us? And since obviously it is us, what is God doing with that? And it was an interesting reflection he wrote. I didn't like every part of it, kind of like the rest of the chapters of the book that I did review. But it was just interesting to think about, like, we're less likely to be racist against, specifically Black people because we're Black. But at the same time, it ain't easy being Black. I know that's a quote of somebody.
Yeah.
So, and of course we're sinners like everybody else. So we have these other non-controversial sinful proclivities that are just easy to talk about. So maybe BCM should just focus on those from now on. Like, we're only going to write about super common generic sins.
I mean, I feel like that wouldn't be that interesting to read, though, to be honest.
That was another thing I was thinking about, was that the leeway that is kind of given in other Catholic media spaces. Like, what I wrote was controversial, yes. But am I getting the same reaction that other Catholic publications that already exist would get? I spoke hypothetically about like the Jesuits and Maryknoll, but like the Jesuits have a huge media publication, and they write stuff that's super controversial. And I don't know that they get this kind of targeted blowback. It was very fascinating to me, and I may be wrong on that, but I do think that as a new Catholic publication, we're not necessarily getting the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. I don't know. I think probably yes and no. Because I mean, we basically have a small American sede vacantis movement that's claiming our current Jesuit
what?
actually the Pope. So I'm not sure if like that's pretty big. That's pretty big blowback that he's getting on one hand. So
that's fair. That's fair.
In that sense, I kind of think maybe not. But then in other ways, I think you're probably right in that it is extra at the same time. But,
welcome to America, I guess.
Yeah.
Not America Mag.
Yeah, it's our beautiful upward crash towards heaven, I guess.
That's an interesting way of putting it.
Yeah. I mean, there's only stumbling upward. That's all we get as Catholics, right? There's no good Catholic except for the sinner. I guess.
And you say that you're not ready to write for BCM. Like these insights right here, we need this. BCM needs this.
Well, I don't know. I will try to finish my PhD, so I have a little more time on my hands.
Oh my God! When are you going to be finished with a PhD?
That's a great question.
Oh boy. So we're never going to get a piece from you. I'm sad. I hope people can see my sadness. I'm actually crying.
It'll definitely be there one day. As long as we don't get canceled first.
Hey, yeah.
Yeah.
It happens.
No, I promise you, this is my, I can't believe I'm doing this in a public forum.
Promising on air. Wait a minute. I'm going to publish this part. Like, this is going to be the clip that I extract.
At least one guest column for Black Catholic Messenger.
Look at God. We have got a promise here. If we could do a digital signature right now, I would.
All right. So, I guess I don't have anything else. Do you have anything else?
Did you speak about subsidiarity specifically? Because I am deeply interested in. So my concept of subsidiarity had to do with like some sort of organizational brouhaha, something to do with politics probably. But then you explained it, and it was something else entirely. So I do want to explain for the people. Bonus fact: what is subsidiarity?
Okay, so subsidiarity, as far as I understand it, it's this principle that's born in Catholic social teaching that basically says that you basically want to handle problems at the scale that they occur. And I think a lot of discourse around subsidiarity in like kind of the modern, like online Catholic sphere is saying subsidiarity means you need to have the smallest government you possibly can, which I don't think is an accurate representation of the like meaning of the idea. And I think I should have done more homework about it before trying to define it and talk about it. But I think that something that I find very interesting, obviously like within the context of this conversation, is that there are obviously problems that have like relatively small scale where, we should be looking out for our fellow community members, right? Like we don't need necessarily some national scale intervention to help our friends and family, neighbors and neighbors who might be in need. But there are also issues that are of like kind of a national and international scale and do require responses of that scale. And yeah, I always think about like the kind of Catholic case for how that should be done. Because kind of like by its very definitional nature, there are problems that are on that level of scale, right? Like it's, I think of like real estate. Real estate is extremely, extremely expensive right now. Hard housing, at least here in the Northeast and in like DC where I'm from, as well as Denver where I lived for a year. And between all three places, like essentially finding housing is like virtually impossible, and it's tied like pretty immediately to one, all of the real estate is being bought up by institutional investors that view the primary purpose of housing as being an investment and the secondary purpose as
housing somebody,
right? And these are like multinational corporations, hedge funds that are buying tons and tons of property and real estate and making it really hard, if you believe, causing a huge homelessness crisis. So I think like a subsidiarist answer to that isn't necessarily one that says, oh, this is something that we should handle in our community, right? Because you have Bain and Company, a giant hedge fund, buying up real estate and making the rent really, really high and increasing homelessness. And I don't think, it seems very hard to answer that question in a way that is like purely local, right? In my neighborhood, I can't put up Bain capital money. And so I think there's this really interesting question of subsidiarity, and especially as it comes to racism, right? Racism doesn't exist. It exists obviously in our communities, but it also exists in the church hierarchy on a massive scale. And I think oftentimes we tend to think that subsidiarity means, this is a solution for, us in our neighborhoods or our individual actions, but often questions of this scale actually demand answers at scale. And yeah, I think that's an interesting thing to question about it.
So you're saying the USCCB ad hoc committee on racism is enough?
I don't know. Maybe not. I think they should definitely at least be given the bashing stick for a little while and be allowed to make some sweeping changes like that.
That would be nice.
But yeah. And I mean, it makes sense, right? Like in the hierarchy, I feel like we don't really question it that much. If the Pope says, I guess we are starting to question it a lot. But if the Pope says...
Bad example.
yeah. And historically, too, it doesn't really work very well. Like, it was the propaganda basically ordered all the religious orders to evangelize the enslaved and free men in the United States, and all the religious orders are like, sorry, new phone, who's this?
Pretty much. The story of American Catholicism. Like,
yeah. So I guess maybe that isn't necessarily the right example, but at least in theory, these answers probably should be coming from, the hierarchy.
Do you mean the Vatican, perhaps?
I mean, yeah, obviously, we're Catholics, so the Vatican is definitely the top of the pyramid. But
all right, you guys, you heard it here first. The Vatican needs to institute an anti-racism committee for the United States. And
I have this Twitter joke that no one has ever liked because it's way too niche. But I'll just tweet at Pontifex, put the United States on interdict. and nobody ever gets it or likes it.
Yes. Like, it's been 250 years. It's time. That's the quintessential Black Catholic joke in a way that's like super serious. And send me that tweet so I can retweet it on the BCM account.
Sounds good.
Well, it's been great having you here. With that, I guess I will bid you farewell. This has been the Black Catholic Messenger Show. I'm Nate Tenner, and this has been my special, perhaps the most special guest we've ever had for BCM, and the most educated, Cory Frontin, out of Boston.
Thank you.